welcome to Sunshine for Your Life. You know, when I was in college, one of my classes took a field trip to our state prison. And for me, it was a very difficult experience. There were rows and rows and rows of cells, as far as the eye could see, one right stacked beside the other. And then if you looked up, which I did, toward the ceiling, there were rows and rows and rows and rows of cells stacked up. So what you're looking at is a bunch of cells all the way across the building, all the way up the building, and then, of course, they had steps, metal steps for guards to get between one floor and another. And for me, it was difficult because I wondered, how could prisoners stand essentially living in a cage beside all these other people that are living in cages, but essentially alone, without any kind of contact with other people, unless they had a visitor, and no freedoms. And I thought, how can they stand living like that? Even if they, in a sense, deserved it, even if they had committed crimes, it seems like an awful way to live. And then I thought about people in history and people in the Bible who found themselves in pits and in wells without any hope of ever getting out, although according to the Bible they did get out. And I happened to think about Joseph, and Joseph is the person I want to focus on today. Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rachel, and he was his father's favorite son. He had 12 sons, but he was his favorite because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And the first verse I'm going to read is Genesis 37, 3 and 4. And this is what it says. It just reiterates what I've been saying. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. He made him a coat of many colors. I may as well read that again. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. He made him a coat of many colors. Now the brothers, and he had 11 brothers, hated him. And I think a lot of that was jealousy. Now you stop to think, if you're raising a family, it's never good to show favoritism to one child above the other children. It always causes jealousy. There's always problems from that. Every child should be treated alike. So at any rate, he was given many favors and his brothers hated them, and what they thought about was how could they get rid of him. So this is Joseph's story. At one point, Joseph went to check on his brothers. They were herding sheep, and the brothers thought this is a good chance for us to get rid of him. So they grabbed him and they put him in a pit. He begged them not to do it. He knew he could die in a pit, but they did it anyway. Then eventually they took him out because they thought that might not be quite right, and he was sold into slavery. It turns out he was sold to Potiphar. Potiphar was one of Pharaoh's officers, and so he ended up going to Egypt. So the second verse I'm going to read is Genesis 39, 2 and 3, and this is what it says. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was prosperous. The master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper. So I'll read that again. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was prosperous. The master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all that he did to prosper. So here he is. He's in as a slave, supposedly, but he's got responsibilities, he's doing well, and he's treated well. But Potiphar's wife accused him of rape, and so he ended up in prison. And it's thought by many Bible commentaries that he really didn't believe that Joseph had raped his wife. Otherwise, he would have just killed him. But he put him in prison, and that was an indication to some scholars that he really didn't believe his wife's story. Otherwise, he would have been gone. But he did end up in prison, and then he was elevated to a leadership position in the prison. He was able to interpret dreams, and he got out of prison and prepared the people for famine that was going to come. Part of his dreams that he interpreted in prison, or actually not his dream, but the king's dream, but he interpreted it, was there was going to be 7 years of prosperity and 7 years of famine. So he was responsible. He got out of prison, and he was responsible for preparing the people for the famine to come. He built all kinds of structures, and they stored grain and everything so that they would be able to make it through the famine when it hit. So it did hit, and there was starvation in the land. And Joseph's family, the brothers who had rejected him, they had to go to Egypt to get food. And the brothers did not recognize Joseph, but he recognized them. He had grown up, and the brothers didn't recognize him, but he did recognize them. And the brothers realized that they had done wrong in doing what they did to him, and they thought that the starvation and all the land and the lack of food was their punishment for having treated him in the way that they treated him. Now, Joseph eventually revealed himself to them. And the third verse I'm going to read is Genesis 45, verse 4 and 5. And this is what it says as he's revealing himself to them. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. God did send me before you to preserve life. Let me read that again. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt, and God did send me before you to preserve life. Now, the verse is a little longer, so now I'm going to read the whole thing. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. So what was a horrible, horrible thing in Joseph's life? He's saying God engineered it because he was going to use Joseph to save his family, even though his father thought he was dead, because the brothers had told him he was dead, and they took the colored coat and they put blood on it from an animal that they had killed and convinced the father that he had met his death by a wild animal, and it was just, the deception was simply awful. But they did all of that, and here Joseph is forgiving and saying, don't even feel grieved that you did this. Don't be angry with yourself that you did this, because I was sent here to spare your life and to spare everybody else's life, because we're in the midst of this famine, and I am the one who was prepared for it so that I can give you food so you can survive. So, and it's that verse is followed, this won't be on the screen, but the verse is followed by this verse, verse 8. It was not you that sent me, but God. So God made good out of that very bad situation, and it couldn't have gotten much worse. What Joseph went through was horrible. He was put in a pit. He could have died. He thought he was going to die, and then he was released. He was sold into slavery. He thought he'd never see his father again or his brothers again, and he was falsely accused of rape and sent to prison. I mean, that's 3 strikes against you from the beginning. But he always acted in a very honorable way. He forgave his brothers. He was not angry, and God was always faithful to him. So during Joseph's years in captivity, what did God do for him? Well, according to Genesis 39, and I'm taking all of these, none of this will be on the screen, but I'm taking all of these verses from chapter 39. Joseph prospered. That's in Genesis 39, verse 2. Joseph was successful, Genesis 39, verse 3 and 23. He had recognition, that's Genesis 39:31. He had favor with the authorities, Genesis 39:4 and 21. He was promoted, Genesis 39:4 and 5. He was a blessing to others, Genesis 39:6 and 23. He was protected, Genesis 39:20. So I'll just run through this again. Joseph prospered, he was successful, he had recognition, he had favor with the authorities, he was promoted, he was a blessing to others, and he was protected. So what can we conclude from this? God can make any bad thing that happens to anybody, he can turn it around for good. He certainly did it for Joseph, but he's been doing it through the centuries, and he can do it for you as well. So anything that happens that's bad, God can turn it around to good. He's in control of all things. He's not going to leave you nor forsake you. The Bible promises that, and we know that all things turn around for good because the Bible says so in Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who are the called according to his purpose. You see, and that's always true. It's always been true. Joseph was victorious because he was faithful to God. No matter what the circumstances he was in, he always trusted God, for he saw that God was in control of everything. He was not bitter. He was forgiving. He forgave his brothers, and he did not allow bitterness to creep in. If he had allowed bitterness, you stop to think about it, if he had been a bitter person, he would have had a lot to be bitter about. The things that happened to his brothers wanted to kill him. They thought if they put him in a pit, that would take care of it. And they felt guilty about that. They took him out. They sold him into slavery. Finally, we got rid of him. We'll never see him again. Then it turns around, they've got to go for him for food so they can survive. They tell their father that he's dead. His father's in a state of grief, probably a grief that he doesn't quite recover from until the end when he gets to meet his son again. So what is true of Joseph is just as true for us. We can go through painful experiences, feeling stuck at times, not knowing how we're going to get out of what feels to us like a horrible pit. Yet if we are faithful to God, God will accomplish his will in our lives. Remember that God knows where you are in your life. He knows your problems. He knows your circumstances. He knows what problems you're going to have because he knows everything about you. He knew you from before you were born. He already had you on his mind, so he knew what kind of problems you would run up against. He knows how he's going to resolve your problems as a result of your prayers and faithfulness. And he knows you're going to get into pits, and he knows how he's going to take you out of those pits that you're going to get in. I mean, it's just life. We fall into pits, and I don't mean necessarily literal pits, but our problems can feel like pits to us. Drug problems, financial problems, health problems, family problems. It all feels like a rut, like a pit that you can't get out of. But God will maneuver you through it. He'll either take you out of it or he will maneuver you through it because he has it already planned. Now, we don't know how our experiences are going to fit into God's plan, but we know that God's going to fit it all together for us. We don't even have to worry about it. It's all going to work because it's in his hands. Like Joseph, we need to understand that God is in control. He can use even awful things and make good out of them. We see he did it for Joseph, and he's done it for many Bible characters, and he will do it for you as well. Satan cannot destroy us. No matter what happens, God will use it for the good. So for us, it means that God will always be victorious, and we also, if we're faithful, will always be victorious because God never knows defeat. God only knows victory. Only victory and always victory. So I'm going to close it here. We'll be doing something next week that's a little different. So please join me then.